Rustin, when I was education director at the NAACP, we would hear a lot about concerns that people in the community were having related to the California exit exams. And I was intrigued when you briefly described some of the courses that young people are taking, whether it's algebra, art, or some of the other kinds of courses. I have a niece who in Montgomery County, prior to her graduation 2 years ago, was taking a number of those cosmetology sorts of programs and experienced some of the same difficulty in getting into college. But I'm curious, draw for us, if you can, a link between the course content, particularly the kinds that you discussed, and what we're seeing with regard to performance for students of color on the California exit exams.
They are wholly unrelated in this sense. What the high school exit exam asks students to master is really middle school competencies, right? You're talking about a little bit of algebra, up to maybe some 10th grade English, and even then students can get 40% of the questions wrong, 45% wrong in math, and still pass the high school exit exam. So the content that we're talking about here is much more rigorous. Now, the interesting dynamic that we saw in California was around the community that galvanized itself on college prep, but simultaneously was organizing against the high school exit exam. And there were some real hard struggles there because some of us questioned, isn't it a little oxymoron, right, to say that we don't want to be held accountable, or our schools to be held accountable for teaching us a very, very baseline set of skills to know and be able to do when we get out, high school exit exam, and at the same time we're demanding so much more. We're demanding facilities so that we can have 2 years of laboratory science. We're demanding 4 years of English. We're demanding up to and exceeding elementary and secondary algebra, right? So it's a little bit of a paradox to argue for both. Since the time this organizing began to really take root around college preparatory curriculum, we saw a silencing of the organizing around the high school exit exam. Because the truth is, if we're going to have exams that show students and parents and the business community and the world at large that kids are capable of succeeding in a 21st century economy, you're going to need a whole lot more than what California's high school exit exam actually measures. That said, as we talk with superintendents and principals up and down the state, they will say things like, but for the high school exit exam, we could get no traction on improving high school learning. You bring up a good point, though, Michael, and that is the use of assessment to drive instruction in the classroom. I think most of us would agree that assessments are at least in part for that reason. So we've got to do better about measuring what we mean by college and work readiness. In California, we also have the early assessment program by the CSU system. We call it a Part B of our standards test. If students want to go to college, they can opt to take these 18 questions as a Part B on Algebra 2 and English. If they demonstrate a college readiness according to the CSU system, they are automatically guaranteed admission to credit-bearing coursework in college. The failure rates, those kids that aren't college ready, are staggering. You're talking about over 85% of the Latino and African American young people, again, that think they're going to college are proving not to be college ready, but rates as high as close to 70 and over 50% for white and Asian students respectively too. So as we move in this direction of college and career ready for all, it certainly is about access. It's also about an assessment that drives that learning in the classroom and makes it clear to the public and students themselves that indeed they are ready for the demands of college.
Thank you very much.
Michael, can I follow up on that for just a second? Assessments, I think, are really important in this way, and everything that Russell said about exit exams is by and large true. We did a study on this a couple of years ago. They're basically middle, early high school. So high stakes exit exams in high school are not terrific, and they're certainly not good indicators of whether somebody's ready for college. So what we see states doing is moving more in a direction of looking at end of course exams, which make a lot of sense, of course, in a high school environment where you're going to give a final, you're going to want to know how kids are doing. Some states are already doing end of course exams anyway, but just this past year, 14 states worked together to create an Algebra 2 end of course exam. That exam was created with college faculty and high school faculty to actually get a good, rigorous end of Algebra 2 assessment in place. Exam was given to nearly 100,000 students this past June over 12 of the 14 states. Another test will be given in the fall, we'll give another one in the spring, but it's a really interesting and promising idea, one that states can cooperate and get together. Huge procurement challenge, that could be a whole other session, about how 14 states can actually get together, develop, and then give the same exam. But it's a very promising development because it enables the states to both, it will ultimately enable them to both compare, do our kids know this content? That's great, that's a good way to check that box for high school. Are our kids ready for credit-bearing work, a little bit like the CSU exam? And if they're not, they're still in high school. We still have a chance to get them ready while they're still with us. So an early indicator to students, tell something to students about how important that exam is and that course is for their futures. And ultimately, we hope in our work with higher ed that higher ed will enable this exam and maybe others in English and other subjects that are so important to send the same signal that the CSU sends with the California exam, and that is if you do well on this and you continue to take math throughout high school, we can tell you you're ready for credit-bearing work. You are a student who's on track. And right now, the exception of what California does, we don't send that signal to kids. They don't know until lots of kids graduate, unfortunately, thinking they're ready because we hand them a diploma. And it's a pretty big shock to find out in the placement exam that they're really not. So I think there's some really promising things that states are doing here. And assessments are important, and we have too few of them that really can be used for college readiness. And that's just a huge place where states are interested in doing a lot of work.
Now the thing with them, of course, is they have to be in the class to take it.
Yes.
Right? So you're still looking at a big access piece.
Well, and again, but if it's a requirement for the state and the
requirement.
state is going to give the exam, then there's going to be some accountability for schools that are not giving the course and then they're not doing well in the exam. So it should ultimately, this is what the states hope for sure, drive the access that we've been talking about today.